What's happening, y'all? Corey Buschlen from Fantasy Stock Exchange coming at you to bring you the Week 8 DFS recap. As I do every Monday, I go through the DraftKings Millionaire Maker contest, the Sunday Million contest on FanDuel, as well as recap my own lineups, talk about what the lineup construction was, what the strategy was of the winners, also what I can learn from the winners and apply to my own lineup strategy as well. So as always, guys, if you enjoy this video, like, comment, subscribe to the Draft Sharks YouTube channel, as well as make sure to check out my weekly GPP tournament picks articles on the Draft Sharks website, both for FanDuel and for DraftKings. So without further ado, guys, let's get into it. DraftKings, we're going to start with this week. We usually start with FanDuel, but I had a horrible week on FanDuel, so we're going to start with DraftKings instead. Now let's look at this guy's lineup construction, and this was one of my best calls of the week so far. Carson Wentz, Michael Pittman Jr., and A.J. Brown stack, basically. So this guy took Carson Wentz, stacked him up with Michael Pittman Jr., who was a very popular play, and ran it back on the other side of things with A.J. Brown. This was one thing that I got right. I did talk about all three of these guys in my article as great plays, especially once Julio Jones was out with the injury. We knew that A.J. Brown was going to get a good share of the work. Of course, it was a little chalky to play Michael Pittman Jr. and A.J. Brown, but this guy made up for it in other areas. He did play Elijah Mitchell, who also was getting some steam as well. But the big differentiations that this guy did to his lineup was he played Michael Carter at 6% ownership, who obviously had a big game, big volume game for him, and Pat Freiermuth at tight end, who was also sub 5% ownership, who got a pretty decent fantasy day as well. Same with the Seahawks defense at about 5.1%. So again, this is a classic example. This lineup is you don't have to fade the chalk at every single turn, right? He played chalky plays. He played Pittman. He played Godwin. He played A.J. Brown. He played Kupp. These guys were expected, even Elijah Mitchell, were expected to be highly owned. But what this guy did enable himself to win the contest because he was able to pick his contrarian spots well. 3-4 places where he went, against the grain. Didn't have to go, okay, quarterback. Who's everybody playing? Let me play the opposite. Running back. Who's everybody playing? Let me play the opposite. A lot of people get themselves caught into that kind of trap sometimes where they're fading the chalk at every single turn, where the chalk is the chalk for a reason, right? Certain chalk is good chalk. Pittman, Godwin, I talked about them both in my article as examples of good chalk. I thought they were both going to have good games. So good on this guy for recognizing the good chalk, playing that and fading the bad chalk and pivoting to some good contrarian plays. So moving from his Millie Maker winning lineup to my DraftKings Deposit Kingdom lineup, which is a rake-free contest that I play in. It was a $10 entry. I ended up winning $35. I was actually inside the top 12 for most of the 4 o'clock slate. And then once we saw some guys like Tom Brady getting some more points, then I started to, knock down the rankings a little bit. But overall, like I said, I played the exact same stack that this guy did. Carson Wentz, Michael Pittman Jr., and A.J. Brown. Ownership was a little bit different, obviously, in a smaller field contest. My issue was that I played DeAndre Swift, who prior to the Jamal Williams inactive news was going to be considered a highly played running back, a 20% running back or so. But once Jamal Williams was made inactive for this game, this was mega chalk, right? DeAndre Swift was a huge chalky play, 45% ownership. I thought it was good chalk. I thought the process was sound. I thought he'd have a good game against a bad Eagles run defense and an Eagles defense that was giving up a lot of targets to the running back position. Didn't necessarily work out. Cordero Patterson, I didn't expect to get that much steam, that much ownership at 21%. In this contest. I expected him to be more so a 10% guy. So I thought I was getting a contrarian play there. Not necessarily the case. Deontay Johnson was a guy that I liked as a contrarian play this week, though. Was able to, hit decent value for me there. Dallas Goedert actually got less ownership than I thought. T. Higgins pretty solid there, but the steam of the day was the Washington football team defense at barely above minimum on DraftKings, got 27% ownership in what was considered the lowest over-under on the slate of any game. So I probably should have figured that defense was going to get a little bit more steam than I initially thought. So that's definitely something I can learn from. But overall, I think when you look at construction-wise, I did construct my lineup similar to the guy that won the Millie Maker contest. I knew I was eating the chalk with Swift, with Brown, with Pittman, and with Higgins, but I didn't necessarily see it coming to the extent that it did with Cordero Patterson. I also thought Swift would have a much better game than he did. But the Wentz, Pittman, and A.J. Brown stack was enough for me to make up for it. So moving on from DraftKings to FanDuel, this is the Sunday Million winning contest. And as you guys can see, it's much different than the one that won on DraftKings, which I find very interesting. Only 190.66 fantasy points won this contest. Usually we're in midway through the 200s for these winning contests. But the Sunday Million was a little bit more easy competition for this week compared to the Millie Maker. And as you guys will see with this guy's build, I really love what this guy did. And this is the classic example of leverage, right? We talked about it in the articles as well, that Stephon Diggs was going to be a very chalky play on FanDuel. Stephon Diggs was, I think it was like the 12th or 13th most high-priced wide receiver. Of course, he had a great matchup. Everybody was really excited about Josh Allen, so therefore the easy stacking partner for Josh Allen is Stephon Diggs. But what this guy did was, instead of playing Stephon Diggs, instead of playing Emmanuel Sanders, instead of playing Tommy Sweeney, which even got some steam, this guy played Cole Beasley, who was a guy that I talked about as a cheap option in my article, and a guy on the Fantasy Stock Exchange YouTube channel who I talked about as a must-start player this week. That was an awesome move, and that was a way to get huge leverage on the field by getting the Josh Allen exposure that you want, which is 20.6%. So he was chalky, but you got a unique stacking partner with Cole Beasley by the fact that you didn't have Emmanuel Sanders, who flat out busted, and you didn't have Stephon Diggs. And not only that, but you didn't run it back with anybody, right? Everybody was talking about, oh, the easy stack this week is Allen, Diggs, Sanders, run it back with Gesicki, run it back with Waddle, run it back with Gaskin. This guy didn't stack with anybody and did not run it back. So that is definitely good to see. Joe Mixon and Michael Carter, two guys that were talked about. Joe Mixon was definitely a guy that I expected to be highly owned. He was, but he was good chalk. Michael Carter, again, 4.5% drafted in a large field tournament. That is easy money right there for somebody getting good volume. AJ Brown actually got less traction on FanDuel because he was a lot more expensive relative to the other wide receivers. So he was a guy that I talked about specifically on FanDuel as a good play. Keenan Allen, also a good play. I thought he would actually get more ownership than that. So good on him for recognizing that. Overall, this guy's lineup was relatively even keel. There was no like huge mega chalks. There was no complete contrarian plays. Outside of the Broncos defense, really, which I did talk about in my article as well, and Michael Carter, this guy kind of just went even keel across the board and was able to stack up a nice lineup. So congrats to him. This was my own personal lineup in the Sunday Million contest. And again, similar to the guy that I just talked about, mine was a little bit more even keel as well. I didn't eat chalk at every single turn. I did play the Tom Brady and Chris Godwin mini stack with a Alvin Kamara run back, which definitely was pretty solid for me. 24 points, 27 points, and 15.1 points. But Tom Brady also came in a lot lower owned than I initially anticipated. Joe Mixon, again, I knew I was kind of eating some chalk there. Kyle Pitts, again, at the tight end position, knew I was kind of eating some chalk there, and he just had a bad game. Stephon Gilmore was on him the majority of the time from what I saw. Really disappointed in what I saw from Kyle Pitts. I thought he was going to have a much better game than that. What I decided to do, though, was kind of go with leverage plays across the board. Chase Claypool, I played as a one-off in that Pittsburgh game. I thought because Deontay Johnson was going to have a tough matchup, maybe Chase Claypool is able to get there in the deep game, catch a long touchdown or something. Again, as I talked about already, Cole Beasley was a great leverage away from Stephon Diggs, away from Emmanuel Sanders, and away from even Josh Allen to some extent, because a lot of those Josh Allen stacks were going to have Stephon Diggs or Emmanuel Sanders in them. So I really liked that play. Myles Gaskin, again, I did kind of mini correlate the Cole Beasley and Myles Gaskin thing. I was thinking, again, you get Myles Gaskin as leverage away from Jalen Waddle and from Mike Gesicki if he gets it done on the ground, and Cole Beasley gets it done on the other side of things. That would have been a great contrarian mini stack for me. I ended up min cashing in this lineup, only 10% ownership for the Washington defense when it was a lot higher owned in the smaller field contest that I was doing. So again, not a bad lineup overall for this one, but I just, missed in a couple places. This lineup, however, the next one that I'm about to talk about was terrible. And I made a lot of bad decisions. This one's one that I definitely have to learn from. And my biggest mistake in this one was going way too contrarian with my primary stack. Matt Ryan, Kyle Pitts, and DJ Moore. Again, not way too contrarian in the area of ownership. I just mean way too contrarian in playing a guy that I thought was a bad play because I liked his outlook as a leverage play. So sometimes I can get caught, and sometimes everybody can get caught into playing guys because everybody's going to play players around them in terms of their price range. But there's a reason that those guys are chalkier and the other guy is not chalkier. It's because Carolina's pass defense is really good. Matt Ryan didn't have Calvin Ridley in this game, and I honestly didn't adjust this lineup once I found out about the Calvin Ridley news. So maybe if I would have adjusted it once Calvin Ridley was ruled out, then I would have changed my tune. But yeah, Matt Ryan, definitely not a good play. Didn't work out. Nick Chubb also was a guy that I used as a pivot play away from Joe Mixon, away from DeAndre Swift. But the reason that those other guys were popular and Nick Chubb wasn't was because he was coming off of an injury. We had Dearness Johnson still in the mix, and it was a tough matchup against the Steelers. So again, another bad, just way too contrarian play for me. And another way too contrarian play was Antonio Gibson, a guy that had not been getting the volume, has been dealing with injuries. And the shining light for me, the reason I liked Antonio Gibson was because he logged a full practice on Friday, and he also wasn't questionable coming into the game for the first time in a while. And I figured, hey, Antonio Gibson might be very low owned. He definitely was, but there was a reason for that because he's not been getting the volume. McKissick, Patterson, both of those guys involved. Cortland Sutton, also another leverage play that I really liked. And the reason I liked him was because everybody was going to play Judy. A lot of people were going to just avoid this game in general, and for good reason. This was a simple game selection thing. I picked two one-off players, really, Cortland Sutton and Antonio Gibson mini stack from a game that I knew was going to be low scoring, had one of the lowest over-unders on the slate, and that one's on me. So this one, way too galaxy brain, way too contrarian. Definitely going to learn from it and adjust next time. So if you guys enjoyed this video, like, comment, subscribe to the Draft Sharks YouTube channel. Stay tuned for next week, weekly GPP picks on both FanDuel and for DraftKings. Definitely some things to take away from this week. Peace out, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.